Imagine a land where kings are assassinated so regularly it's basically a national pastime, where dark forests stretch for hundreds of miles and peasants genuinely believe that demons lurk in every river and crossroad, where political borders shift like sand dunes because some duke decided to split his kingdom among 7 sons who all immediately started killing each other. Now, am I describing the continent from The Witcher, or am I describing medieval Poland? Because honestly, the answer is both, and the overlap is so staggering that once you see it, you will never look at Geralt of Rivia the same way again. Andrzej Sapkowski didn't just borrow a few monster names from Slavic folklore and call it a day. He built his entire world on the bones of real Polish history, real Central European politics, and a mythology so rich and so terrifying that it makes the Brothers Grimm look like children's bedtime stories. Which, okay, technically they are, but you get my point. Today we're going deep into the real history behind The Witcher, and trust me, the truth is every bit as wild as the fiction. Let's start with the landscape, because setting matters more than people think. When you picture the continent in The Witcher, you're imagining dense primeval forests, muddy villages, crumbling keeps on hilltops, and vast stretches of untamed wilderness between pockets of civilization. That is not fantasy invention. That is literally what Poland and the broader Slavic world looked like for most of the medieval period. We're talking about the Białowieża forest, one of the last remaining pieces of the primeval forest that once blanketed most of Europe. This forest is ancient. It has trees that were already old when the Magna Carta was signed, bison still roam there, wolves still hunt there. In the medieval period, these forests were enormous, and travel between settlements was genuinely dangerous. Not because of monsters necessarily, but because of bandits, wolves, exposure, and the very real possibility of simply getting lost and starving. Polish and Slavic villages in the early medieval period were isolated, suspicious of outsiders, and deeply superstitious. They existed in clearings carved out of the wilderness, surrounded on all sides by the unknown. Sound familiar? Every single village Geralt rides into has that exact energy. The peasants eye him with suspicion. They need him, but they don't trust him. They live on the edge of the wild, and they know it. Sapkowski captured this atmosphere so perfectly because he wasn't making it up. He was describing the psychological reality of life in medieval Central Europe, where civilization was a thin, fragile membrane stretched over a vast and indifferent wilderness. Now let's talk monsters, because this is where it gets really fun. Most Western fantasy pulls from Germanic and Celtic mythology. You get your dragons, your elves, your dwarves, all very Tolkien, all very rooted in Norse and Anglo-Saxon tradition. Sapkowski deliberately went in a different direction. He reached into the deep well of Slavic folklore, and what he pulled out is genuinely nightmarish. Take the Striga. In The Witcher, a Striga is a cursed princess, transformed into a monstrous creature that emerges from her crypt at night to feed on human flesh. That comes directly from Slavic belief. The Striga in Polish folklore is an undead being, sometimes described as a person born with 2 souls or 2 sets of teeth, who rises after death to drink blood and devour the living. Villagers in medieval Poland took this so seriously that they would sometimes bury suspected Striga face down with sickles placed across their throats so that if the body tried to rise, it would decapitate itself. Archaeologists have actually found these burials. This is not legend. There are real skeletons in Polish soil buried with anti-vampire precautions. Then there's the Noonwraith, or Podnika, the Lady Midday. She appears in fields during the hottest part of summer days and attacks farmers with madness, heatstroke, or death. This is folklore's way of explaining why people collapsed and died during harvest season. The Drowner, or Topilek, is a water demon that drags people under rivers and lakes, which is a very rational fear when you live near water and most people cannot swim. The Leshen, or Lessie, is the lord of the forest, a shape-shifting entity that protects the woods and punishes those who disrespect nature. Every single one of these creatures in The Witcher has a direct, documented counterpart in Slavic mythology, and Sapkowski treated them with a level of respect and research that most fantasy authors simply do not bother with. What makes this even more interesting is the role of the Witcher himself. In Slavic folk tradition, there were real people who occupied a similar social niche. Cunning folk, Wise women, traveling healers, and exorcists who moved from village to village, offering supernatural services for pay. They were needed but feared, respected but never fully accepted. They existed on the margins of society, exactly like Geralt. The Witcher is not just a cool fantasy archetype, he is a literary echo of real people who lived and worked in Slavic communities for centuries. Okay, now let's talk politics, because the political landscape of The Witcher is absolutely unhinged, and it maps onto real Polish history with almost eerie precision. The continent is a patchwork of rival kingdoms constantly at war, forming and breaking alliances, assassinating each other's leaders, and generally behaving like a collection of heavily armed toddlers fighting over the same sandbox. The Northern Kingdoms versus Nilfgaard is the central geopolitical conflict of the series, and it mirrors a pattern that dominated Central European history for centuries. Smaller, fragmented Slavic states struggling against larger, more organized imperial powers. In real history, Poland went through a period called the fragmentation, starting in 1138, when the kingdom was divided among the sons of Duke Bolesław III. What followed was nearly 200 years of chaos. Dozens of competing dukes, constantly shifting borders, civil wars, betrayals, and outside powers like the Teutonic Knights, the Mongols, and the Holy Roman Empire, all trying to take advantage of the disorder. If you've played Witcher 3 and felt overwhelmed trying to keep track of which king controls what territory and who just betrayed whom, congratulations, you now understand what it was like to live in 13th century Poland. The Nilfgaard Empire itself echoes several historical powers. Its military discipline and expansionist ideology recall the Teutonic Order, the militant crusading state that waged war against pagan and Christian Slavs alike along the Baltic coast. Its cultural arrogance and centralizing ambitions also echo the Holy Roman Empire, which constantly pressured Poland and other Slavic nations from the west. Sapkowski blended these influences into a single antagonist that feels historically grounded because it is historically grounded. And the assassinations of kings in the Witcher storyline? Poland had its share. Przemysł II was murdered in 1296 under mysterious circumstances, barely a year after being crowned king. The political instability was so severe that at one point Poland essentially invited a foreign dynasty, the Angevins from Hungary, to come rule them because their own nobility couldn't stop killing each other long enough to govern. This is the kind of chaotic energy that Sapkowski channels directly into his fiction. Here's where it gets really thematically rich. Geralt of Rivia is a perpetual outsider. He is needed by society but rejected by it. He does the dirty work that nobody else wants to do, and then he's treated with contempt for doing it. He tries to remain neutral in political conflicts and is punished for it. He is caught between empires and forced to make impossible choices. If you know anything about Poland's historical experience, this should sound painfully familiar. Poland has spent much of its history caught between larger powers, Germany to the west, Russia to the east, the Ottoman Empire to the south. It was partitioned, erased from the map entirely for over a century, and repeatedly forced to fight for its very existence. The Polish national identity is deeply shaped by this experience of being the outsider, the in-between, the nation that survives by sheer stubbornness despite the world's apparent desire to destroy it. Sapkowski channeled this into Geralt on a personal level. The Witcher's neutrality is not apathy. It is the survival strategy of someone who knows that every power structure will eventually betray him. His compassion exists alongside his cynicism. He cares deeply about individuals, even as he distrusts institutions. This is a very Polish sensibility, forged in centuries of historical trauma and dark humor. There is a reason Sapkowski's books resonated so powerfully in Poland before the rest of the world ever discovered them. Polish readers recognized themselves in Geralt immediately. The global success of The Witcher, through the books, the games, and the Netflix series, represents something genuinely significant in the history of fantasy literature. For decades, the genre was dominated by Western European, specifically British and American perspectives. Tolkien drew from Old English and Norse mythology. C.S. Lewis drew from Christian allegory and British pastoral tradition. Even George R.R. Martin, for all his subversion, built his world primarily on the Wars of the Roses and Western European feudalism. Sapkowski offered something different. He proved that Slavic history and folklore could be the foundation for a world-class fantasy epic that resonates with audiences everywhere. The monsters are different, the politics feel different, the cultural texture is different, and that difference is precisely what makes The Witcher feel so fresh and compelling. When you fight a Leshen in Witcher 3, you are engaging with a mythological tradition that stretches back over 1,000 years. When you navigate the political intrigues of Redania and Temeria, you are, whether you know it or not, navigating a fictionalized version of real Slavic political history. This matters because representation in storytelling matters. Not just representation of people, but representation of traditions, mythologies, and historical experiences. The Witcher opened a door for Slavic fantasy on the global stage, and the world is richer for it. So the next time you ride through Velen on Roach, dodging drowners and dealing with corrupt officials, remember that you are not just playing a game or watching a show. You are walking through a world built on 1,000 years of real history, real belief, and real human experience. Geralt would absolutely fit right into medieval Poland because in many ways, he never left it. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the real history behind The Witcher, smash that like button so hard a Noonwraith feels it. Subscribe to the channel if you want more videos exploring the real history behind your favorite fictional worlds. And drop a comment below telling me which Witcher monster you think has the most terrifying real folklore origin. I read every single comment and I love hearing from you. Until next time, safe travels on the path.